Hello, my friends. This is State Representative Tom Coulter, and this is another episode of Issues of the Day. You know, folks, years ago when I was a kid, when I was a young boy, I remember my parents always speaking to me about drugs. And they'd talk about wrong time, wrong place, wrong friends. And if they felt they could keep me away from those wrong people and out of those dark shadows, then I would be able to stay away from drugs. And due to good parenting, I was able to do that. Today, parents have a more difficult job. In fact, much difficult job. They have to worry about things that my parents never had to worry about. They have to worry about drugs in the medicine cabinet. They have to worry about products that are sold over the counter in local variety stores that are used by some of our youth to get high. Things that we would never imagine, like buying Gumby bears and soaking them in alcohol and putting them under their tongues so that by the third period they can't walk straight and teachers don't know why. They can't find alcohol anywhere. Yes, my friends, we have a lot to worry about. In October, I ran a forum, an informational forum for parents on drug awareness at Silver Lake High School. I was disappointed, although I was delighted that the Red Sox were in the World Series, I was disappointed the event fell on the first night of the World Series. So the superintendent and I felt that if we got a half a dozen or a dozen people, we should feel pretty happy. We got over 200 parents, parents who were very afraid, parents who heard enough about this problem we've got here in our society that they wanted to learn more. We're having another forum on April 1st at Plymouth North High School. All are welcome. It's for parents. We're going to have a distinguished panel that will run the gamut from the DARE officer who will work with our children at a very young age right up to and through the judges that have to deal with the problems that are created by drug addiction, and the district attorney who prosecutes people who are oftentimes considered very good people that make very bad mistakes. So in Issues of the Day today, in this program, I am absolutely delighted and honored to have as a guest Judge Rosemary Minahan from the Plymouth District Court, presiding judge at the Plymouth District Court. Hello, Rosemary, how are you?
Good morning.
It's great to see you. Thanks for being here today. I had the pleasure yesterday of sitting with Rosemary for a couple of hours. And although I think I'm a person as a representative that's in the know, I realized how much I didn't know. The Plymouth District Court, has developed specialty courts, and one of them being drug court, that has, I believe, will revolutionize how we prosecute, how we deal with people in the drug scene. And I think you'd agree with me, many of them very good people who made very bad decisions.
Yeah. The drug court actually started a few years ago in response to a problem that we could see in this community. I had been the presiding in the Wareham District Court, and when I came over to Plymouth in 2010, I noticed an explosion of synthetic opiates being used, heroin. They start on pills, and then they move along to intravenous heroin. Most of the time, and when you say good people that make bad decisions, or sometimes it's good people that decisions have been made for, and it turns into an addiction. For example, it is an athletic injury, and they are placed on pain medication, Perk 30s and Perk 15s. Kids all know what that means. And so they get placed on Percocets, and they can't tamper with the use of OxyContin anymore, so the Perk 30s and Perk 15s are what a lot of folks start with. And they take those pills, and then they find that shortly after using a regular dose of those pills, they need those pills, and they can't get those pills, and so quickly they move on to the less expensive heroin.
Let's talk about that for a minute, Judge. I'm told that a Percocet pill on the street could cost $80.
That's correct.
I'm told that a hit of heroin could cost $4.
Yeah, I was going to say $3. Yeah.
So as a good person, perhaps even an athlete, evolves or progresses through their recovery, post-op or whatever, and they're taking prescribed drugs, and now that runs out. and they can't get more. When you and I were kids, the only folks that did heroin were the really deeply ingrained drug addicts. That's not the case anymore, is it?
I think it isn't the case anymore, and I think what we see is mostly young people. Our drug court has about 90 in it today.
90 judges,
No,
90 staff.
90 individual defendants who are in the drug court as participants. We run actually 2 specialty courts, and each court has a subspecialty. So we call it IPS, Intensive Probation Supervision, for our addicted individuals, and those are both those involved with substance, such as heroin or what we call the benzodiazepines. Valium is probably the most common, or Ativan, or any of those sort of anti-anxiety medications. They're highly addictive, and I think people don't realize how addictive those are. Then we have a separate part of our IPS session, which involves the multiple offender DUI defendant, who there's this particular modality of treatment and probation modules that work better than others. The courts in Massachusetts are on the cutting edge, really, of using what we call evidence-based practice. So we now know that there's certain things we do with defendants that are far more effective than other things. And so I think with regard to both our drug court and our other specialty court, which is our mental health court, inside of that mental health court is a small group of veterans as well that we provide services. Both of those specialty courts, also called problem-solving courts, operate in such a way that we take existing state services that are funded by the legislature. Some of those are administered through the executive branch, such as the Department of Mental Health or the Department of Public Health in the case of substance, or the Department of Corrections if it's a Section 35. But some of those are also private vendors. So with a lot of our services, we link together what I would call, for lack of a better term, a continuum of treatment service, so that there's no gaps for this population, so that they don't come out of a detox and they're detoxed physically, but mentally they're very shaky. They come back into the community, and 2 days might as well be 2 months. So they need to go immediately into treatment, and we have to link those treatment modules together so that they're seamless and that there's a continuum of treatment, and we provide wraparound treatment services and care for those individuals. There still is, within the construct of probation, it's on the criminal side of the court. So they are actually defendants who are on probation, which means they're after the trial. They don't have to have had a trial. They can plead guilty in first session or one of the jury sessions. And then they are placed on probation, and there's certain conditions they will have to meet in order to stay in the community.
Like treatment requirements?
In typically what we do, and I think it's important for parents to understand, that we try to look at the individual as a whole. So if I have an 18-year-old in front of me who's now addicted to substances, pills, and then moved on to heroin, I'm thinking that 18-year-old will be 45 someday, I hope. We'll make it that far. We'll make it to 60. So I have to think about what kind of employment possibilities is that person going to have. If that person has a felony offense, a nonviolent crime, perhaps a shoplifting, or maybe some other kind of larcenous event, if I give them a conviction, if I give them a guilty finding on that first felony, they will have a very difficult time getting employment. So one of the first things we do is we try to pull them into treatment rapidly and give them an opportunity to keep their record pseudo clean, and they will still have a record. They'll still be, if you pull up their CORI, you'll see that there was an event on that record. But it's kind of a legal fiction. We continue the case without a finding for a period of time, and then we require them to do certain things. And some of those things can be pretty simple and easy to do, and others can be quite difficult for them. For example, if I think there's an entrenched addiction issue, one of the first things we'll do is pull them into perhaps custody, and I think a lot of parents despair when they see an 18-year-old going into the lockup. I would just indicate one of our continuum of care services is the Sheriff's Department, and Sheriff McDonald does a great job detoxing. I send him a lot of people that are sick. And I often say to colleagues, when I started 20 years ago as a judge, you know, the career involved like 4 words, saying allowed, denied, overruled, sustained in trial. I now find myself in first session saying to the court officer, Mr. Court Officer, can you make sure that on the minimus taking him to the sheriff that we've told them this is a benzodiazepine withdrawal and he needs a medical detox. So it looks often more like an emergency room than a courtroom. We talk more medical often than evidence, but that's the beginning of treatment, because tonight or tomorrow night, while that person is waiting at the jail for a bed in the Department of Public Health system, they're not using. And I know that's secondary to being inside, they are not using.
Judge, you've been on the bench for 20 years.
Yeah.
How has it changed in those 20 years? Did you ever think that you'd be coordinating social services for the people before you?
I don't remember. It wasn't as if it was an event that it changed one day. It changed. It was a process over time that you'd come off the bench in the morning and say, wow, there was a lot of addiction out there today, or there were a lot of break-ins to houses, and you'd see what we see now, and I think you touched on it in your opening remarks. We have a straight civil commitment procedure called Section 35 of Chapter 123, and that really was designed, 100 years ago. I mean, you can look at the history of that statute. 150 years ago, that statute existed with that section, and it provided for the elderly, entrenched alcoholic, that was 40 years developing an alcohol addiction, and then ultimately his life, mostly male, life broke down, and they ended up homeless, and so the state took care of them in what we call Bridgewater Addiction Center. Now, the Section 35 profile is often an 18-year-old where mom works for Verizon and dad's a teacher. And it's a very different profile. And that's all happened within the 20 years that I've been on the bench. We now see 18-year-olds coming into that courthouse with backpacks saying, I'm drug sick and I need treatment. And I think the good news is that there is treatment. Our module for drug court is they're perhaps into the Sheriff's Department for a while, but we rapidly get them into, and I thank the legislature and the leadership there for supporting treatment services. So we provide a 90-day program which is run by the Department of Public Health. Actually, High Point is the vendor in New Bedford. And those individuals get 90 days of inpatient treatment, really great treatment that I think if you bought it on the market, you'd probably spend $600–700 a day for that, and the state pays for that. I think it's amazing that we have that kind of a treatment service. As soon as they get out of reflections, they come right back into the courtroom and they have to see me again, and we then make a decision where they're going. Usually High Point recommends either a further treatment program or they go into the IP session. And the IP session is 120 days where they have to go to OCC, which is the Office of Community Corrections in Plymouth. If they don't have a high school diploma, they'll get a GED before they leave. They have to stay drug and alcohol free. They have to do community service. We urine screen them. In 2012, we did 7,000 urine screens in the Plymouth court. We outdistanced any of the courts in Boston, Springfield, Worcester. So we're a very proactive court in terms of keeping people clean and sober.
Judge, help me with this now, because I learned so much from talking to you yesterday that I feel I have more questions now than I have answers. Let's take a young person, let's call it a hypothetical 20-year-old male, who goes into the local drugstore, right here in Plymouth. Mm. Forget the drugstore, local variety store, any variety store.
Yeah, any variety store.
And buys spice or bath salts. Now, that's an over-the-counter product that's not intended to be ingested or smoked, but it's now considered the synthetic marijuana alternative. And now they have some sort of reaction or response to that inhalation of spice that is intended to be an incense, and they have a bad reaction, and they do something illegal. They commit a crime. So now they're before you in district court, not for a drug problem, but for a crime. How do you sort that out?
I think a lot of the the addiction issues involve crimes. And let's take a substance, I'll get back to spice in a minute, but let's just take a substance that's perfectly legal, and we watch it on TV during all these sports events, which is alcohol.
Right.
And the kids are getting bombarded with it, billboards with big, pictures of bottles of different kinds of alcohol, and it always looks lovely on those ads. They're the best ads on TV, aren't they? We all know that. They're funny and they're entertaining. There are two substances that will kill a person detoxing what we call cold turkey on the floor of our cell in the courthouse. One is benzodiazepines, and two is alcohol. So all of us in the court system, many of us not medically trained, know that if I have an alcohol detox in my courthouse, we have to get them out of that lockup rapidly and into treatment. So because it's an alcohol detox, everybody knows, the court officers know, the attorneys know, the judges know, that alcohol detox needs to move out of that courthouse rapidly. In Massachusetts, those people are brought to courthouses. We have an agreement, Jordan Hospital sends over, and they do a wonderful job there. But if they have individuals coming into that hospital who, they think need longer-term public bed care, they will petition for Section 35, or they will assist the family in doing that. So back to spice. So what spice is, and I think more than the convenience store, it's available on the internet. So the kids can go on the internet, and I would suggest to parents, go on the internet and punch in or Google the words K2 spice and see what comes up. Because I think what's really important for parents to understand is that it is difficult to keep up with what is going on out there. I find myself, I'm not surprised by anything anymore. I mentioned to you yesterday, for a while we had to deal with chipping, which was when individuals would come into the courthouse, they sort of knew that the judge was going to take them off the floor, and they would have to come off of the synthetic opiate substance by themselves in cold turkey, and they didn't like the feeling of that. So they would take one of these time-released substances before OxyContin was, and thanks to the legislature, because that was all done as a result of legislative action, that changed, that you couldn't tamper with the time release of OxyContin. They would slice a piece of that pill off. They would then cut their skin and slide the slice under their skin and put a Band-Aid over it. And so, thinking differently, you say to people when you're stepping into the lockup, do you have any weapons? Do you have any, any controlled substances on your person? You don't think to say, could I see what's under that Band-Aid? And I think parents need to get smart about what the kids are doing out there. You can't talk to your children enough about what this is. And you can't assume that because they're in middle school that they're not using it. I guarantee if you ask your children tonight at the dinner table, do you know anyone that's using spice? They know you're not talking about cinnamon and nutmeg. If you talk to a 40-year-old, and I sometimes say to the people in the session, I say, no alcohol, no drugs, no spice. If I say that to a middle-aged person, they think, what's she talking about? She doesn't want me to use cinnamon on my toast in the morning? But if I say that to an 18-year-old, I don't have to explain what that is. And what it is these are substances that, I say to the kids in the court, you might as well smoke a magic marker because of the horrible things it does to the brain. And we often see behaviors, and I see this locally in our cities and towns, here in our towns, where the police will come upon an emergency situation where an individual is pulling off his or her clothes and biting at the officers and banging his or her head up against glass or smashing it off of cement or something. I can see that behavior, and I think spice. And parents need to be aware of that the kids are experimenting, they're snorting stuff, they're drinking stuff, they're smoking stuff, they're putting stuff under their skin, they're putting things under their tongues. We can't, whatever we're dealing with today, tomorrow will be given new and interesting things to understand. So I think the courts, I hope, that parents understand that when they drive by that sort of monolith in the middle of that field, that big courthouse, again, if it weren't for the legislative action, would still be in the 1820 building down the street. But we have this beautiful Taj Mahal down there, that they think treatment. And they think that what probation is doing in there, what the judges are doing in there, within the construct of a due process model, everybody gets an attorney, everybody gets their full panoply of due process protection. But we're going to reach for treatment, and we're going to, as often as we can. And sometimes that's going to be hard for parents to watch because they're going to watch their kids going down the stairs of the cell. What I would say to them is, and I think they need to remember this, there is hope. And I say that to parents all day long. When they come in on a Section 35, which is the petition they can request when they know their kids are using, and their kids are coming home high, and their kids are, have needle marks in their arms, or I say this sort of, I had years ago, I'll never forget this. A woman said I was dry mopping under my son's bed, and I was sort of humming to myself, and I was dry mopping, and I sort of slid this dry mop under the bed, and out came 3 syringes. And I looked at the 3 syringes, and she said my life forever changed, because I went from thinking about his college application, and by the way, this young man was applying to college and had very good grades, to, oh my goodness, my son is sticking needles in his arms. He was sticking needles in his freckles, so she couldn't see the holes in his arms. And so what I say to those parents when they come in and they are so despaired that this child, for whom they had great plans, is now using intravenous heroin, and they think of all the things we all think of: Hep C, Hep B, AIDS, all the illness, MRSA, what things can you get from using needles that you share? And so the parents need to know there's hope, because lots and lots of these folks are detoxed and stay clean and sober. And we did a study of our court, which if you have time, I can just talk about why there is hope. For our drug court, the Curry College, a wonderful organization, came in and studied us. Many of the folks in their master's program are police officers, local police officers. I think it was 7 from Plymouth, in different towns, EMS, fire. They were getting masters in their Curry College Masters in Criminal Justice. And they studied our IPS court, our Intensive Probation Supervision Court. And they took Office of Probation, cooperated, and they provided a cohort of similarly situated drug-addicted defendants statewide. We blocked out the names. Actually, the cohort group was older, so we should have done worse in Plymouth, because our group was 18 to 24, and I think theirs was 24 to 30. And for that cohort, recidivism rate was, I believe, and I have to go back and look at the study, but it was, I think, 51% committed a new crime within 6 months. That's a group that is not in the Plymouth Drug Court. And if they live in Gardner or they live in Springfield, they can't be in the Plymouth Drug Court, but we use them as a cohort study group.
Right.
And then we looked at the group that was in the Plymouth model, and we use a smorgasbord of what we call New Hope, which you can Google, New Hope Hawaii, which is the model we use. It's a combination of sanctions and treatment and sanctions and treatment. And our cohort group in the Plymouth court, recidivism rate for graduates was 6.1%.
Recidivism, for those that don't understand that, is
committing a new crime. Back in. Actually, we defined recidivism broadly to not only include a new crime, but also any kind of a probation violation or an event that caused them to come back before the court.
So the work you're doing in Plymouth District Drug Court versus the cohort group, the
that's
not
group, being studied. Yeah, that's not being. I'm sorry, that's not being placed in drug court. Yes.
50%,
50.1%. Yeah.
Recidivism.
6.
6.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
And even for those that didn't make it through completely because they ultimately got violated on probation and was sanctioned and ended up in jail, something like 33%. So the numbers are still markedly better, even for those who don't make it all the way through. And what do they have to do? They have to come and see the court twice a month. In mental health court, they have to come every week. And we know in the court system that the defendant knowing that I have to go back in and see Judge Minahan next week. I mean, I talked to the folks at Community Corrections, and I know that when defendants are late for, say, programming, they'll say, are you going to tell the judge I was late? They know they have to come in front of us and deal with us again. So the good news is Plymouth Court is offering treatment for both, and we haven't even talked about the mental health court, but we're a fully funded mental health court with liaisons with the Department of Mental Health. We have a licensed independent clinical social worker on staff at the courthouse for parents who are dealing with children who have have mental illness. If they have a criminal case, we also use a treatment module so that they get what we call wraparound services from start to finish, and so that they don't have a break in their medication and they are able to stay medication compliant. And for those that are homeless, we get them respite beds, and we make sure that they have a place to sleep tonight and they have food. We deal with the pantry, the food pantry all the time. The churches in Plymouth provide, sometimes they'll provide, they work together and they
Right.
provide evening services. People
Right.
can actually stay and sleep in those churches. So lots and lots of folks in the government and outside all working together for success.
I got to tell you something, Judge. I am so impressed. The work you and your team at the Plymouth District Court, the work you're doing is saving lives. And the best example you gave me yesterday is when the mom and dad were in the courtroom and you were working with their son, and the mom and dad were validating what you were doing, almost as a
Yeah, you
parent.
see sometimes the parents in the back, when we do put an ankle bracelet on someone and say you cannot go out tonight after 8 o'clock and you have to be in the house from 8 p.m. until 7 tomorrow morning, I think for the parents, no more arguing about you can't go out at 11 o'clock at night. Why are you going out? There's nothing good going on from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. We all know that. So those fights are off the table if they're in our drug courts.
Judge, there is hope.
There is hope.
There's hope
There is
because
hope.
of the work that the courts are doing. The day of just, locking them up for 90 days, 120 days, a year, and throwing the key away.
Yeah,
those are gone, thank
Yeah,
goodness,
they're gone.
because nothing good comes out of that. If they weren't addicts or if they weren't bad people when they went in, perhaps they were when they
Yeah.
came out. I think the work you're doing is God's work, and I commend you for it.
Thank you.
Folks, we're about to wrap up. First of all, I want to remind everyone of the drug forum we have at Plymouth North on April 1st, and you'll see it online, you'll see it in the newspaper. Judge Minahan is going to be representing Plymouth District Court, the work they're doing there, and we'll have a very impressive panel that will talk about everything from the Office of the In-School Resource Officers, the DARE officers, we call them, right up to the court system, and the whole pendulum along the way from treatment. Parents, I know this is a great, difficult time, a great time. I have soon-to-be four grandsons. I'm excited about that. But I know how difficult it is for our young parents to raise children, particularly teenagers. And it doesn't stop there. It goes into the 20s and 30s. Good people are being caught up in some bad things. So listen, learn, watch, ask questions. Don't lose touch. That's my message for you for the day. Judge Rosemary Minahan, I'm so
Thank you very
proud
much.
of you for the work you're doing, and I'm so grateful that
Thank
you
you.
joined us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, folks, for another Issues of the Day, and have a great day.